Today, a woman sits in a prison cell because of something she wrote online. It wasn't a direct or serious threat, and the authorities know that. It wasn't a serious plan of violence. It was a crude, angry tweet. Just words. Ugly ones, yes, but words nonetheless. She deleted it within hours, she apologized, but it didn't matter. The judge gave Lucy Connolly over 2 years behind bars. And all this is happening in the same country where violent criminals are routinely spared jail. A 2024 report from the Sentencing Council revealed that more than 40% of repeat violent offenders receive suspended sentences or community orders. Ministers themselves have admitted that prison overcrowding is now so severe that thousands of offenders are being released early under emergency measures. In modern Britain, physical violence may earn you therapy, sympathy, understanding, a second chance, but speech, politically inconvenient speech, especially if it lands on the wrong side of the ever-shifting cultural line, is treated as something far more dangerous, more corrosive, more unforgivable. Say the wrong thing, use the wrong phrase, question the wrong orthodoxy, you'll be investigated, smeared, possibly prosecuted, and in this case, like this one, locked away. This is modern free liberal Britain. And there is no consistency in any of this. No principle that holds from one case to the next. What we are left with is selectiveness, selective outrage, one rule for some, another rule for others. What's offensive one week is brave the next week, depending on who said it and who they said it about. And look, let me say this clearly. Yes, there is racism online. No one's denying that. No one should deny that. There's abuse, there's hatred, there's name calling, there's dehumanizing stuff, and it can be ugly. We shouldn't pretend otherwise. But here's the thing. Racism against so-called people of color is not the only form of racism that exists. I don't know why that has become so controversial to say. It's true. You don't have to tick the right identity boxes to be on the receiving end of racism or hatred. Racism towards white people is real too. So is abuse against men, straight people, working class people, the list goes on. And none of it is okay, not any of it. The idea that racism and abuse only really counts towards certain groups, that it's only truly harmful if it's aimed downward in this supposed hierarchy, it's complete nonsense. Aside from all that, the main point is that no one should be arrested for what they say, not for a crude joke or a bad joke or a bad opinion or an offensive tweet. We don't need speech laws that turn poor judgment into a criminal act. It's dangerous when we let the state decide what kind of speech crosses the line, because in a free society, it should be the public, the people who decide what they want to hear, engage with, challenge or reject. Let people argue, let them criticize, let them disagree, call out or ignore offensive speech. Now we have to understand, Britain has come a long way when it comes to freedom of speech. Let's take a step back. There were centuries when criticism, for example, of the monarch was treason, when the printing presses required royal licenses, when newspapers were shut down for offending the church and the crown. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that Britain began to nurture a public sphere where disagreement wasn't treated as criminal. But still, even then, things were still a bit fragile. During wartime, censorship reasserted itself. During periods of unrest, mining strikes, Irish nationalism, anti-war protests, dissenters were followed, raided, arrested. The official posture at that time was speech is welcome until it becomes dangerous, and dangerous was defined by whoever happened to be in power. Ironically, something that we seem to be returning to now in 2025. But anyway, over time, a cultural norm did take root, and the best way to challenge ideas wasn't to silence them, but to expose them. You could say things others found offensive, you could challenge orthodoxy, you could criticize the government, you could, in a real sense, speak freely. But now, it looks like the state wants to manage speech. That long-standing distinction between speech and harm, between words and actions, is quietly being dismantled. And we see see it most clearly in legislation. The Public Order Act, once intended to prevent riots and physical intimidation, is now being used to prosecute people for, guess what? Even praying silently in public. The hate crime framework, originally designed to protect against targeted abuse and harassment, has expanded so greatly into a nebulous category of perceived hostility, where offence is in the eye of the beholder. Then there's the Online Safety Act, where platforms should preemptively remove content that is not illegal but simply considered harmful. Harmful to whom? According to what standard? Well, that's left conveniently vague. So we are at a time where it's not enough to avoid causing damage, you must now avoid causing distress or alarm or offence. And in that space, almost anything goes. Almost anything becomes a punishable act so long as someone somewhere claims to have been hurt by it. The ramifications of this cannot be overstated. Once speech is judged not by what it causes, but by how it makes someone feel, then we have a problem. And once laws are written to protect people from being offended, the only question that matters is who gets to decide what counts as offensive. Because feelings are subjective. One person might shrug something off, another might take deep offense, a third might feel personally attacked. So whose feelings are we going to prioritize? Whose emotional reaction becomes the basis for criminal law? What will happen is that what you're allowed to say won't be based on principle, it will be based on politics, on the mood of the moment, on which group is seen as more sympathetic. This slow bureaucratization of speech, this idea that expression must now be filtered through a series of institutional gatekeepers, not to protect the vulnerable, but to prevent discomfort, especially the discomfort that challenges prevailing ideological narratives. And in this climate, free speech is no longer a right, it's now a risk, one that fewer and fewer people are willing to take. Now, nowhere is the erosion of free expression more quietly corrosive than in the sphere of religious criticism, or shall I say Islamic criticism, since you can literally criticize every other religion. As you know, Britain formally abolished its blasphemy laws in 2008. That was seen at the time as a milestone, a sign that the country had matured past the point of needing legal protection for religious ideas. You could still be offended by someone's views, of course, but you no longer had the right to silence them, threaten them, harass them. Faith was something you could criticize, mock, question, reject, just as others had the right to defend it. But that understanding has started to collapse, not through any explicit reversal of the law yet, but through the back door, via public order offences, hate crime legislation, and the expansive idea that certain forms of speech can now be treated as hostility, not even towards a person, but toward a belief system itself. Take the recent cases involving the burning of Qurans. Whatever one thinks of such acts, whether you think they are provocative, distasteful, offensive, it remains the case that they are just symbolic gestures aimed not really always at individuals per se, but at institutions, at ideologies. And in a society committed to free expression, even the unpleasant must be tolerated within the bounds of the law. And yet, we now find people being arrested not for directly threatening others, but for expressing their disdain for a sacred text. You know, in some cases, they are convicted under vague public order charges, intent to cause alarm or distress. We can't keep silent about this. We have to keep speaking out about these issues. For example, recently, there's a Professor Stephen Greer. He's recently come out again to criticise the University of Bristol for failing to protect him against false allegations. Remember him? He was accused of Islamophobia for including the Charlie Hebdo attacks in a lecture on human rights. A student who didn't even attend the lecture complained, and the university launched a full investigation. He was cleared, completely cleared, but instead of being supported, he was dropped. He was removed from teaching, and eventually he was pushed out. They did all this to be respectful to the sensitivities of students. It's cowardly. That's really the word for it. Cowardly. The way institutions fold the second someone utters the word Islamophobia is mind-boggling. And speaking of this word Islamophobia, this is such a useless term. It's literally just a blunt instrument that gets used to silence people, ruin reputations, and protect an ideology. And once you reach a point where you can't criticize a religion, any religion, without being immediately branded a bigot or an extremist or a racist or far right, then the ideas contained within that religion become in effect off limits, untouchable, unquestionable. They are treated as sacred, which is a word I mentioned before, not just to followers, but to everyone. But look, here's the thing. What is sacred to you is not sacred to me. That's the deal in a pluralistic democratic society. In a truly free country, no idea, religious, political, cultural, is beyond criticism. You have the right to believe what you want, and I have the right to question it. To be honest, even hate it. That's freedom. You can worship. I can disagree. That is freedom. Oh, but it's just being respectful. It's about respect. But respect isn't the same thing as silencing, myself. We have to be honest. There are growing tensions in the UK around the role of religion in public life, particularly around Islam. And no, it's not Islamophobic to talk about that. It's not hate to point out that when schools are pressured to change lessons, when councils avoid applying certain laws, when blasphemy becomes a de facto crime, these are problems that affect everyone. The Islamification of this country is happening so quickly. I was going to say under the radar, but it's really not under the radar anymore. It's visible now, it's overt, and still no one in power seems willing to speak honestly and openly about this. So the question is, where does this go? What does this country look like in 10 years? Who will be making all the rules? Who will be shaping the culture? Who will be deciding what can or cannot be said? What happens to free speech? What happens to women's rights when religious or cultural norms start to take precedence over equality under the law? What happens to gay rights, minority voices within minority communities, atheists, liberal Muslims, ex-Muslims, people who depend on freedom of speech and conscience more than anyone? What happens to art, comedy, film, books? And if we're afraid to talk about these things now, what makes you think we'll be allowed to talk about these things later? So let's not take things for granted. Free speech is under attack, not in some vague abstract sense, but in real concrete ways. Right here in Britain, you can still say what you think, but increasingly you'll be made to regret it. And once we lose that, once we replace it with acceptable speech, managed speech, inclusive communication, then what we're left with isn't a free society. What we get is a version of public life where everyone knows the lines, sticks to them, and no one dares go off script. Free speech isn't a culture war issue. It's not a left or right talking point. It's a basic condition for everything else, for inquiry, for disagreement, for progress. And if we don't stand up for it now, then when it matters most, it simply won't be there anymore. So let me know your thoughts about this. Can you still say what you want? Do you still feel free to speak? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, then please subscribe. And if you want to support this channel in any way, then the link is in the description below. See you again.